Hey everybody, let's talk a little bit about what real attacks are and how that impacts our training. So one of the things that we see a lot in Krav Maga, combative schools, that kind of stuff, is that they talk about, dealing with real attacks. But what makes a real attack? Well, we can look at the technical aspects of the attack, right? The arm is moving in this particular arch or that particular way, the way the person sets it up in terms of, how they move or what happens beforehand. And those are all good things, right? We definitely need to train those. We then look at, whether we're training in a live way, right? Is the person actually trying to make contact with me? Are they offering any resistance? All that kind of stuff. We can then look at whether we are training with a trained attack. So one of the problems that we sometimes see is that when you train with people who are experienced, they trained, like they attack you in a trained way. And what that means is, let's say if you're out, let's look at a defense against an overhand right, like the type of kind of wild swing that we often see in monkey dance type fights. People who are trained will actually usually have their hands up with their hand out and throw like a good boxing overhand right. But that's not what the attack looks like in a real context by somebody who may not be trained. And the responses can be very, very different. Okay, so a few elements highlighted there already. But here's the key, that I think at least is the key. My experience, and almost everybody that I've spoken to who's got a lot of experience with real world violence, says what the hardest things are to deal with are the intent or the ferocity of the attack. So the person is not just kind of lazily throwing it. When somebody is really trying to hurt you, right, there is an intent and a ferocity to the attack that is very, very challenging to deal with mentally and physically and emotionally. Okay, so the ferocity of the attack, and one of the things that we often hear is the person got much closer and much more aggressively than I anticipated or than I thought. All right, so people get really, really close and really, really, really aggressive really, really quickly, and then it's actually the intent that we're dealing with, right? The technique is almost secondary, right? If we can't control or manage the intent, both from theirs and ours, it's really hard to deal with anything on a technical level, okay? Now, the question is then, how do we train that intent? Because no matter, right, how much we try, unless we do kind of a Jeff Thompson a la Animal Day, let's all just have at it and try and like really hurt each other, right? It's really hard to train that in an authentic way. And this is where you look at really good scenario training and how you build those. One of the mistakes that you see when people do that is they go, okay, we got to train with real intent, we're going to do scenario training, and they take people who have never actually handled those kind of situations and put them in really, really aggressive scenarios where they have even somebody who's just being verbally abusive, and these things fall apart and that person never comes back to training. So one way of dealing with intent is by providing good scenario training that is scalable and progresses in a logical way and takes into account people's experience with violence, with trauma, with whatever it is, to get them to a point where they can hopefully manage that intent. Even then, there's always going to be that thing in the back of your mind that goes, this is just training, and if it gets dangerous, the other person will stop. Okay? Which is the challenge of training anything in a realistic way in the self-defense combative style or Krav Maga context, right? When we're dealing with something that is not necessarily scripted or sports-oriented. And even in sports context, it can be difficult. So, have a think about that. If you need help with how to construct the scenarios and train that stuff in an effective way, come talk to me.